everyone. Thanks for coming back with us. Now we're going to head into session 5, which is supervision and sustainable self-care. We have explored what it takes to build a career, and now we're focusing on how you sustain it. And we have some fantastic PACFA members and experts to join us in this conversation today. Katinka brings over 38 years of experience in psychology and counselling and more than 25 years as a supervisor, supporting practitioners across a wide range of settings. She has worked across both public and private sectors, giving her a broad perspective on supervision at different career stages. Melissa has over 25 years of experience in psychotherapy and counselling and is an experienced supervisor with a strong focus on relationships, trauma and practitioner development. She is also actively involved in training, supporting practitioners to build skill and confidence in their work. And Sophie is joining us again. Sophie draws on more than 10 years of experience in counselling and now supports PACFA members in areas such as ethics, our colleges and professional standards in her role as head of practice. Thank you all for joining us. So I think I'm going to start by throwing to Katinka and just asking Katinka if you can talk to us a little bit about what does good supervision look like?
Okay, so yes, thank you all for allowing me to talk today about supervision, which is my passion. And as a counsellor for many years, an educator of counsellors and now a supervisor of counsellors, I really strongly believe the importance of supervision. And so before I talk about supervision and what good supervision looks like, I wanted to ask the audience to have a think about these reflective questions, because I think that will also help you answer some of these questions. First of all, do you believe that supervision is something that you just have to do to maintain your hours, as some counsellors feel? Also, think about what has your experience been about supervision to date as a supervisee? Or if you haven't had supervision before, what word comes to your mind? Third, has anyone ever talked to you about how to present in supervision? And also, if you have regular supervision, do you have an initial agreement or a contract? So while we talk about supervision, have a think about those questions. So a good supervision is a good relationship, basically. It's a relationship where the supervisee feels safe and they feel like they're getting something out of it, which is sort of very similar to the therapeutic relationship that you have, counsellors have with their clients. So the benefits of supervision are that it's a better client outcome, that you also receive in good supervision ethical support and accountability. Good supervision also provides emotional support and prevents burnout. Good supervision also increases self-awareness, which is what a bonus, you know, being part of a profession where it's continuous personal development. Which profession has that? Skill development in supervision, building your confidence and professional accountability. Also, good supervision offers professional identity and growth. If you wanted to change careers or find out what your passions are. And most importantly, good supervision provides risk management. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Katinka. Look, I'm sure we're going to have lots of good questions from the audience. So I do remind everyone to use the Q&A function to put some points up for us, because supervision has been discussed or raised a number of times and discussed in the previous sessions. Now, Melissa, could you perhaps bring your expertise to share with us how supervision and self-care work together?
Okay, it's so interesting I'm talking about self-care today. I'm on the end of a bad cold this week. So if you can hear that a little bit in my voice, I had to cancel my whole schedule. But I'm here with you today and I'm feeling well, but just so interesting how it happens, you know, that you end up in this place around self-care. But I think the importance of self-care and supervision is that we're humans, right? We're all nervous systems that are absorbing what's happening. And I think the experience of being a counsellor or a therapist is actually being with another. And in that experience of being with another, we do absorb what's happening. And so then it comes up around our experiences of burnout. Sometimes feeling, there may be vicarious trauma that we might experience because we're people and we're relational. And so we do tend to have those experiences. There can be compassion fatigue. Sometimes you can be sitting with a client and just starting to feel, you might be generally an empathic person, but start to find I'm losing some of my empathy. And so the importance of supervision, I look at it kind of like a soothing, right? A soothing that helps me feel a little bit safer. And when I'm feeling safer, in turn affects the quality of my work when I'm working with people. And so the relationship, as Katinka said, is very, very important with your supervisor. But there's something about that relationship where you're able to bring your feelings around, not feeling so well, feeling a little bit kind of destabilized, or why am I having angry feelings? Why am I feeling tired? And feeling tired with a particular client, right? And starting to ask yourself these questions around why is this happening? In the conversation with a supervisor, and if you have a good supervisor who you have that relationship with, it's able to really help you understand we will have feelings. We will absorb what's going on for our clients, particularly around trauma. And we can experience that as burnout, and we can experience it as many things. So I think being able to use your supervision in a way where you can really sit with our feelings, sit with our experiences, and I kind of call it supervision. It's kind of like it metabolizes things, because otherwise we end up in a place of, why am I feeling this way? Could it be that there's something wrong with me, or why am I having a negative feeling sometimes towards a client? The experience of supervision, if it's really good, is to really normalize all of that, because we absorb a lot, we're doing a lot, we're privileged to be in this work. And sometimes that really does mean taking on a lot of what's happening for the client, that in turn affects us.
Thanks, Melissa. One of the things that I often say about counselling is just how important it is. That is why, if you're an accountant, you don't have to have supervision. If you're a CEO, you don't have to have supervision. But clinical roles require supervision because of the importance of the work and because you are working with vulnerable people. So it really speaks, to that value. Sophie, would you be able to give us a bit of an outline about some of the things that PACFA identifies around supervision? We do have a question online, which is it's about whether there's a list of supervisors available, which of course there is in our Find a Therapist directory, but also just that broader PACFA picture for people.
Yeah, so we have a Find a Therapist supervision, a tab, so you can find a certified supervisor there. We also have our certified supervisors who offer low-cost group supervision, which can be really helpful. We have our clinical supervision standard that speaks about what the requirements are for your renewals, but it also speaks about what is considered supervision and what might not be. And it's interesting to think about the type of supervision that's going to be best for you in the different parts of your career, whether you're just starting out as you move through as well, whether that is individual or group. And then we've got, from a PACFA perspective, the national standards have been released, and we align with the national standards around the supervision. The probably key difference is that the national standards say that clinical registrants are who can provide supervision, which makes perfect sense. You want your more experienced clinicians to be providing supervision to your the supervisees. So, yeah.
Great. Could I perhaps get the thoughts of the group on the use of group supervision versus individual supervision, where that's most appropriate and how that fits together? Katinka, can I start with you?
Yes, because I have training in group work, I love group supervision, and I've seen the benefits of new counsellors or students who are starting out because they gain that peer support at the same time. And group supervision doesn't have to be just about presenting a case. Group supervision could be about talking about a theory, practicing an intervention amongst peers who support you and who are perhaps at the same stage. But also, if you have group supervision that is includes experienced counsellors, that's also adds value to that group supervision. So I think if counsellors can obtain experience in both, it would be very valuable.
Melissa?
I think the benefits of group supervision, it's those aha moments when it's kind of like you're questioning yourself. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I sometimes with one client and not another having some negative feelings? And so sitting in group supervision, you actually get those times when somebody will bring a case or they'll be talking about their supervision and kind of say, and it normalizes it for you. Because otherwise, if we keep kind of feeling like, which is we're vulnerable to, gee, why am I having these feelings sometimes with particular clients? And then you're sitting in group supervision and hearing that others are experiencing the exact same kind of feelings or negative feelings, positive feelings, whatever it might be. It really helps normalize, and it really gives you that aha moment, as well as what I said earlier around, some soothing around how we're feeling.
Great. And perhaps so we could have some thoughts about, and I'll start with you, Sophie, about when people should start getting supervision, in relation to, what point of their career or whereabouts in their training, how does that all kind of fit together? And what is the role of supervision in that early time period?
Look, I don't think it's ever too soon to get a supervisor. I think a lot of people, especially if they're going into private practice, they look at supervision. It might not be the first thing they think about because there's marketing, there's setting up their business, there's trying to find their clients, there's just thinking about their first client, there's all these things that come up. But realistically, the first point should be a supervisor. A supervisor and where you're going to go if you have a legal question. And a supervisor can often not help necessarily with the legal side, but with the code of ethics and understanding different dilemmas or your scope when you're first starting. So even before someone gets their first client or is preparing for their first client, I think they should get a supervisor, whether it's individual or group. Individual is really good because it can support you in, just thinking about what you want. I found that with individual supervision, I had to be a lot more prepared. So I had to really think about what I was going to take to supervision to get the best out of it. I was going to lead it more. It was going to be really reflective of what my needs were, whether it was my intake forms or my scope. So it might not count, it might not be what PACFA requirements are saying in terms of your work, but going to your supervisor with your intake forms is huge. That gives you the benefit of having someone else go, hey, have you considered your type of clients and how you're going to explain the limits of confidentiality as your client base changes? If you're going from individuals to couples or a mum with their child or anyone with someone else in that room, and you've been using tools just for one person, sorry, you've been having sessions with just an individual and you're going to more than one person, your intake form will probably need to change. So you can take that to supervision and have that discussion. So I'm probably hogging this because I love it so much, but supervision is something that is for the whole period. We have a requirement at PACFA of, you need to do a minimum of 10 unless your client hours are above 400 hours, then it's 15. Our certified supervisors need to do 15 hours of supervision. So it might change, but realistically, if you think about your client load, you might have one client who you need 3 sessions in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And that's what it is. You're not then going to not do 3 sessions later on. So you might set them up as monthly, but you might actually have that capacity and go, okay, I actually need more for this client base. And so I'm going to do 15 this year just because that's what I need. or I'm going to do a mix of individual and group because I'm going to get different things from both. The other part is, sorry, I'm going to just two more things. One is that to upgrade to clinical, if people are thinking about it, because I've seen some questions in the chat and people have been talking about it in different spaces. To upgrade, you need to have half as individual and half, you can have half as group, but half as individual. So what I've found in my contact with members is that people might start off with group, get a real sense of what's being brought to supervision, and then also find their own individual so that they've got that one-on-one support. And that can be really helpful to do both of those things.
Great. And I suppose one thing I would always mention, just because I get the emails at the end of the renewal year, is people trying to catch up on supervision at the last minute, which is quite expensive. So we do encourage, particularly early career counsellors to think about the fact that that it's an annual requirement, and if you can get it started earlier, then you're avoiding putting any unnecessary pressure on yourself at the end of the year. Katinka, there's some interesting questions up in the queue, which are about the idea of when you might change supervisor, whether you might change supervisor maybe because your supervision relationship's not working as well as you'd like, or even if you'd like to try a different experience or a different modality. Do you have any tips for people around managing that?
Yes, as I said before, the relationship is very important. So supervisee needs to feel safe in that supervision relationship. And feeling safe means that there is feedback back and forth. And a good supervisor will check in with the supervisee. Are we doing well? Am I meeting your needs? Is there anything else we need to do? And having that transparent conversations can lead to a supervisee saying, well, I really like to explore a different theoretical orientation with a different supervisor, perhaps. And then sharing that with their supervisor, and the supervisor being very encouraging and supportive in that. Unfortunately, there are supervisors out there and supervisee relationships where it's difficult to have that honest, transparent conversation, which is why it's good to have different supervisors or peer groups or other professionals that you can talk to about that situation. Yes, because if you aren't getting your needs met in supervision, I think it's ethically important then to seek someone else.
No, thank you. I think that's a really important point. And I suppose expanding on some of those, not some of those issues that are not always as well explained to people as they could be. Melissa, sometimes when I hear people talk about supervision, they seem to get it kind of confused with the idea of personal therapy. I'm thinking those are two quite different things. Is there something that you could talk to around that, around personal supervision versus professional supervision?
So what's great about having a relationship with a good supervisor is that you can start to find emerging themes, that it can start to be things like you're noticing that you're worrying about a particular way that you're working. You may be noticing that you're coming away from every session feeling like, oh gee, did I do that well enough? And so we kind of have that, conscious, unconscious incompetence, and then it kind of goes up from there. But having that awareness around we can really feel incompetent sometimes, and that actually that may be something that's a bit more of a therapy issue, right? We bring things with us to do with self-esteem. We have the positive, we have the negatives as well. But being able to identify the difference, I'm a big advocate. I really believe to be a good therapist and counsellor, you need to be having your own personal therapy. And the thing about it is that they really are two very different things. And supervision is more looking at the relationship between you and your client, or you and your couple or family or whoever you're working with. Whereas therapy is a little bit more about the relationship with yourself. And there's a real clear difference there. So I think being able to be with a supervisor that can say, consider with you, and maybe just think, maybe this might be now more of a therapy issue for you. I think that being able to distinguish those are very important.
Fantastic, thank you. And so Katinka, just back to you, do you have any suggestions for good questions that someone should ask when they were considering a new supervisor? The kinds of things they might want to raise in a conversation.
Yes, so I think a good supervisor should be aligned with professional standards like PACFA, College of Supervision. I think a good supervisor should have relevant experience. They should have strong reflective skills. So you don't want a supervisor who's just someone you report to about your cases. You want somebody who's also going to ask reflective questions, and somebody who can also balance the support that counsellors require, but also gentle challenge. You want a supervisor, like Melissa said, who knows the difference between being your friend or your therapist, and can manage that. So sometimes it's about trying out the supervisor and see if you get along. What I do with my supervisees, I always have a chatting session with them first, and opportunity for them to ask me questions. I can ask questions, and based on that, we then come up with an agreement, a supervision agreement, so that we have a very clear goals and expectations of how we're going to work together. And that agreement can change as well as we go on.
Excellent. Sophie, maybe could you talk to us, particularly maybe drawing on your experience managing a national counselling call centre, about the difference between managerial supervision and clinical supervision?
Yeah. It's really interesting the type of supervision you get when you work for an organization. Some organizations, it will come from your direct manager, which can have its own benefits but its own challenges. And other times organizations will have an external supervisor who will come in and either provide individual or as a group to the whole team provide clinical supervision. And I think there's a difference in the hat that the person's wearing when they're providing the supervision. So it's really important if you are in an organization and your manager. So when I was managing and I was providing supervision, part of it was working with my team members' scope and doing some things that we would do in clinical supervision, but a lot of it I was also looking at their KPIs. I was looking at their outputs. I was looking at, their auditing of files. I was looking at all the things that I had to think about from a business perspective. And the flip side is when I was receiving supervision from my manager is there was always some thoughts of, I'm going to bring this to supervision. I'm telling my manager that I am either, that I've had trouble in this area. And if you don't have that relationship with your manager, that can be really challenging. And then if you don't have an individual supervisor or an external one, who do you take that to? How do you grow your scope in a system where the person who's in charge of your career is also the person you're going to for feedback? So that's kind of one of the harder parts to manage. It can be really great if you manage it because an organization, they often change their clinical supervisors. So you're getting different people with different experience coming through and providing supervision. And so I would do the same thing in my individual, when I would get my own individual supervisor, that question that you were asking, I would change supervisors as my scope changed, but also just as I found someone else, just to see if there was a difference. And I think it's good practice. But yeah, the other part around the manager's side is that with managers, when they're providing the supervision, you're not necessarily the person that's bringing everything to the room, to that space. And what they're talking to you about might not align with what you want at that point. And so you've just really got to be aware of what the agreement is. Is your perception and is reality of what's happening in that space, are they meeting up or not? And that's a constant question that you should be asking.
And so I think that brings us back to what Katinka just mentioned about a supervision agreement. Could you and Melissa perhaps talk me through what should be in a supervision agreement?
Things around costs, how frequently we're going to meet, your expectations, what you want to get out of the supervision therapist counsellor relationship. identifying your goals, like what you actually really want to achieve. I think being in an agreement as well that really does encourage your own vulnerability and bringing things around feeling safe. Like, how do we make this space very safe for you as the supervisee? So I'll hand it over to Katinka so she can add a few more to that.
Yes, I think also to include the option of reviewing that agreement on a regular basis, but also what I put in my agreement is risk management, so that we're both clear, the supervisor and the supervisee, as to who carries the risk or how it's carried, so that there's transparency around that as well.
Can I just add one more thing to it? Just if you're getting supervision from an organization that's providing it for you, just being really transparent or having transparency around what your supervisor could be telling your employer or not, so that you're all clear that if there is a question in your practice, that they may tell your manager, and that's okay. That's the point as well. There's that give and take, because they've brought it in to make sure it's a safe environment. But you want to have that knowledge and that transparency, and that comes from the agreement as well.
And look, this might be a bit of a difficult question on the run, but it has been upvoted, so I'm going to bring it to Katinka as a start. You know, do you have any suggestions of what might be signs of bad supervision or supervision that's not quite hitting the mark?
I think most supervisees have a gut instinct when something's not quite working. But I think when they feel unsafe, you know, when they feel that they can't be vulnerable, they can't bring their cases that they feel stuck on rather than cases that are going well. Perhaps a supervisor who's very rigid in a theoretical orientation and is not open to alternative ways of working with that particular client. Perhaps a supervisor who also is very focused on the clients and problem solving, rather than focusing more on, as Melissa said, the supervisee and their relationship with the client. So I think these would be a few red flags. Yes, I don't know the others to add more.
Yeah, Melissa, any thoughts?
I think if it feels like there's a power imbalance, if it kind of feels like you're getting told what to do in supervision, rather than there be that safety of you being able to bring it yourself. The biggest thing I say to people is with supervision is, you know, to bring the experiences that you're having, because that's information about the work that you're doing. And so being able to be that vulnerable, that's not easy, right? That's something we kind of form over time. So if we're feeling anyway in those ways how Katinka mentioned, or if the power imbalance doesn't feel right, well, then it's probably time to either bring it up with the supervisor, and if that doesn't go well, most definitely find yourself a new supervisor, because it's all about fit as well. And someone who really, as Katinka said, is really trying to push a certain theoretical base that doesn't align with you. That's really important to be able to move on from that supervision.
And could one of you perhaps speak a little bit to us about the kind of phenomenon of supervisors seeking supervision on supervision?
Well, that's so important for us as supervisors, is to be able to go to our own supervisors, particularly if we're doing group supervision, because there's dynamics within the group as well that we need to understand to be able to either repair or work with it within group supervision. So I think you know, we have to do a minimum amount of hours with supervision on supervision, and the importance of that and the beauty of that is where us as supervisors, we see our blind spots as well, because we have them, particularly if we're working with a group or an individual. And I find the experience so powerful with my supervisor, that supervises my supervision, because again, it's those moments of, oh boy, I did not see that. And then once you understand it, next time I go and see that individual or group, it all flows so much better. There's that ease around, I got this, I can do this. But when you're feeling that feeling and it stays in you rather than in conversation with your supervisor, that can start to feel stuck. So I think it's a beautiful process, and I love my supervisor.
Yes. Well, I can add to that I always thought of this comment that it takes a village to raise a child. I'm sure most people have heard that. Well, I also believe it takes a counselling community to hold a client, so that it's not just the counsellor, it's the supervisor who's supervising that supervisee, but also the supervisor's getting their own supervision. And then the supervisor is belonging to a professional body, professional organisation like PACFA. Then there's the national standards. So it's sort of like these layers that are really holding that client. I think that's what makes good, effective counselling practice.
That is a beautiful image, Katinka. Thank you.
No,
Love that. Sophie?
yeah, I've spoken to the College of Supervision quite a lot about supervision on supervision, and it's fascinating. But I think if you're looking at it from a scope perspective as well, that you're looking at it as you are then when you're going into supervision, you're growing your scope, you're learning a new skill, you're learning a new part of what you're now doing, and when you are supervising, you're not necessarily looking at the client, you're looking at your supervisee. And sometimes having that hat can be like changing hats can be really hard. And so to have someone who not necessarily sitting above you, but that you're going to for support in that and making sure that that's actually what you're doing is really important, and that you've got support when you're first starting out, and then it continues because you end up finding out what the benefit is as you do it. There's no question. It's just like supervision. You continue it whether you're told to or not because you get something out of it. But it's a new thing that you're doing, a new practice, a new part of the practice. So it's important to have someone to support that, which I love that, Katinka, what you just said about a community for a client. That's great.
That is lovely.
Mm.
Sophie, would you mind just talking a little bit about PACFA's requirements for supervision? There's a few questions in the chat about if people are working part-time, do they still need to get the same amount of supervision, and how they would go about finding a supervisor, at the time that it's, very low income, or like it's a difficult financial challenge.
Definitely. So the requirements aren't necessarily based on part-time or full-time. They're based on, as a minimum standard, number of client contact hours. So 0 to 399, you would do 10 per year, 10 hours per year. Some people will choose to do that as hourly sessions or 2-hourly sessions. So their frequency can change. And then if you're seeing more than 400 plus, then it's 15 hours a year. Now, in saying that, we do have a directory of low-cost supervisors. And so if you go onto the Find a Therapist, where you would look up a supervisor, there's actually a tick box that says low-cost supervisor. So you can, or a group supervisor, so that you can find that option. And that is a set fee that the certified supervisors have agreed that they'll charge per person, per hour to attend that. So one of the ways that people will, I guess, when they're first starting, that's why I said a little bit earlier, people might start with group, and then they might have less individual. They might have a few individual a year, but primarily their hours are made up of group. And that's for that reason. It's usually cost-based. And then as their client base grows, they've got more and more cases that they might feel they need to present, or they might have something specific, and therefore their individual might grow and take over. But a lot of people, from what I've found, is that they'll have a mix still.
And I think it's just worth clarifying that when people join PACFA at a different time of the year, they will have a different requirement for hours, because they will not have been a whole year. So you don't have to cram 10 hours if you join in April, for example. That is not what's happening here. We are getting closer to the end of the session, and I know people have made such great comments. I don't want to be, asking questions that are not top of mind. Melissa, Katinka, is there anything that's come out of the conversation today that you'd really like to highlight for the audience, given that they are early career counsellors or student counsellors who are yet to find their first supervisors?
Yeah, I think really learning to bring your true self to supervision. I think when we first start out, it can feel a little bit performative, like we've kind of got to get it right in terms of when we go to supervision. And I think really working on that vulnerable place, that supervision is a safe place for you to learn about yourself and grow. And so finding that kind of supervisor that really helps you have that safety where you can feel like, oh, I'm really doubting my ability, I'm doubting my capacity to work with a certain client, is to be able to bring that up in supervision, and which can be hard, but it's vulnerability is really key for growth for you and your clients as well.
Yes, excellent, Melissa. I would add to that too that supervision needs change over time. So if you're seeing the same supervisee over a certain time, one of the things I usually ask them is, what are your needs from supervision today? And often supervisees feel that they just need to talk about their client. But I'll just read through the list that I've come up with here. So sometimes supervision provides the supervisee to be validated. That's probably all they need. They just need to be told you're on the right track. They might need to be inspired, motivated a little bit. Maybe they need to be helped with problem solving. Perhaps they want to learn something new. Or maybe they want to practice a strategy or an intervention. Or maybe they just want to discuss an idea. Perhaps they want to be gently challenged. Maybe they just want a space to reflect. Perhaps they just need to debrief in that particular supervision session. Or maybe they just want to gain a new perspective. And the most important one is to review their self-care. I think that's very important in this field as well. That's all.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we're a couple of minutes ahead of schedule. Is there anything people would like to add, or should we just, oh, Sophie.
The only thing that I wanted to add was throughout, like watching all the sessions, throughout the sessions, we've been talking a lot about people trying to find new jobs and what might be helpful to do that. And we were actually having a conversation outside of this about the fact that supervision can really help you with that. If you want to, not necessarily in the sense of preparing you for interview questions, but if you're going to go to an interview, you're going to be asked about your scope, you're going to be asked about the clients that you can work with, what your confidence looks like, what you might have trouble with, what your triggers are, all the things that were brought up in previous sessions. And you can work through all of that in supervision. That will help you to feel more confident and be more confident and understand your work a lot better when you're looking for those jobs. So that's why I was kind of saying it needs to start from even before you start working and before your first client. And depending on which way you go, it's going to be important.
Yeah, and I think that's I think one of the things that's really becoming very clear, or potentially was already very clear, but I hope that we're making clear through the conversations today, is just the interconnectedness of everything. We talked about the support of relationships for looking for work. Your relationship with your supervisor is one of your key relationships. They're not necessarily going to help you find work, but they are going to help you get prepared for work. And then, and having a good supervisor is often really helpful just to get you prepared for that state of mind, even if you're not actually seeing clients yet at that point. So it's a really dynamic, and it's certainly, it's been really inspiring to see that in this clinical space, because it's not something you see outside the healthcare professions. It's and I think counselling as a profession is particularly innovative and proactive in supervision. So that's really exciting. Is there anything you guys would like to wrap up on before we finish up this session and move to the next one? No? Thank you so much, Katinka and Melissa and Sophie. As always, hearing from PACFA members is so inspiring. And for people who are interested specifically in supervision, I do encourage you to have a look at the College of Supervision certification, which is what we recommend people undertake in order to work as a supervisor. And there are specific trainings that align with that. So the information is all on our website. All right, we are going to go to a holding slide for a minute. People can get a cup of coffee and stretch their legs. And if you haven't already, I do encourage you to go to the PACFA booth and have a chat with Sitong, who has been patiently working there today. She's a key member of the membership team, or have a chat to insurance.com if you are considering a quote or looking at your insurance needs. This is a really unique opportunity to get that kind of personal information in this space. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you soon.